Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's QMed webinar. Medical Device Silicone Tubing, Technical Extrusion Webinar, Manufacturing Trends, and Case Studies. I'm Chris Keach, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few brief announcements before we begin. First, this webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in our Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you may also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. For more information, please look for our brochure, also on the Resources widget, Medical Device Custom Manufacturing Solutions. Towards the end of the webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. And lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click on the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now, on to the presentation. Medical Device Silicone Tubing, Technical Extrusion Webinar, Manufacturing Trends and Case Studies. Discussing today's topic are Charlie Zambilis, Manager, Engineering, Flexan, and joining him today for our Q&A session will be Dennis Rector, Director, Engineering, Flexan. It's with great pleasure I now turn this special session over to Charlie to begin. Charlie, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. As a contract manufacturer, we recognize the importance of sharing technical experience and developing collaborative partnerships with engineers and R&D personnel. These partnerships are necessary to push technological boundaries and develop innovative medical devices. Recognizing the growing demand for medical devices made with silicone extrusions, Flexan has prepared this webinar to familiarize participants with extrusion types and secondary manufacturing processes that will help you produce innovative medical devices. Participants in this webinar will hear our team share design, manufacturing, and assembly techniques that could be considered for your future product design and launch initiatives. As Chris said, my name is Charlie Zambilis. I'm your presenter, and I will be speaking through most of the presentation. Later, I will be joined by my colleague, Dennis Rector. Combined, we have 40 years of contract manufacturing experience with silicone medical devices. Our main areas of expertise are extrusion, molding, and assembly of finished medical devices. We can assist in prototype development and validations, as well as production ramp-up and support. Flexan is a global contract manufacturer of custom, high-precision silicone, rubber, and thermoplastic components for a broad array of applications, primarily used in medical devices. Other markets include hearing technology, miniature pneumatics, industrial controls, aerospace, and defense. Flexan delivers cleanroom manufactured, assembled, and packaged silicone and thermoplastic molded components for use in implantable Class 3, disposable Class 2, and Class 1 medical devices. Flexan sells its products worldwide and is headquartered in Lincolnshire, Illinois. There are currently 4 locations. Flexan Salt Lake City handles thermoplastic molding and extrusion, device assembly, printing, and packaging. There's Flexan Lincolnshire, which is the global headquarters. At this location, there's silicone rubber extrusion, molding, and assembly. Overseas, there's Flexan Suzhou, and at that location, there's a clean room for medical silicone rubber molding and device assembly, as well as areas that house industrial molding. Finally, there's Flexan Chicago. This location can formulate custom rubbers for molding and overmolding of medical and industrial components. Here, they also handle carbon black molded rubber components and assemblies. I'm going to hand things back to Chris for our first polling question for a moment.
All right, thank you, Charlie. We do have 2 polling questions for you here today, and to answer either of our polls, simply click on the radio button next to the answer that's appropriate for you, and then click the Submit button. We encourage your participation, and our first polling question for you here is, are all silicones biocompatible? Here your answers can be yes or no, and we'll give you a few moments to go ahead and input an answer, and then click the Submit button. And also, if you'd like to ask a question, now is an ideal time to do so. Go ahead and click on the Q&A icon, type your question in, and then click the Submit button. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can. If we're unable to get to your question today, someone will get back to you after the program is over. So let's go ahead and take a look now at our results. It looks like about 15% said yes, 85% said no. So Charlie, your thoughts on our first polling question?
I think our audience did well. I'm going to throw my opinion of the question as well here. So that is correct. All silicones are not necessarily biocompatible. Now, medical grade silicones normally will be. However, it will depend on the amount of testing that backs them. Some amount of testing can be leveraged for the manufacturer, or the end user can conduct their own testing. Flexan leaves a final responsibility regarding biocompatibility to our customers, because you never know how it will actually be used in a finished device. Why would someone choose silicone for their device? Silicone extrusion is a logical choice for medical devices due to its biocompatibility, compatibility with common sterilization methods, and its non-toxicity. Silicone is excellent at resisting adherence to body tissue and does not support microbial growth. Silicone carries a wide temperature service range and has excellent mechanical properties. Here's a table summarizing some of the key properties where silicone excels compared to common plastics. It's preferred for flexibility and feel, and these are both properties that can often help earn patient and doctor preference. There are many manufacturers of silicone rubbers, and this is a list of some that provide medical-grade silicones. NuSil, Dow, Wacker, Elchem, and Shinetsu are here to name a few. All of these suppliers provide a broad range of products, and depending on the product requirement, each has strengths that can be tapped to reach the most appropriate solution. Flexan has collaborated with each of these suppliers and can help guide your material choice. Many factors go into the design of a silicone medical device that incorporates an extrusion, and these design factors can incorporate not only function, but appearance as well. One of the most impactful on the price of your device can be the level of biocompatibility required. This can range from Class 6 at the low end to long-term implantable at the upper end. Depending on the material usage, this can represent a difference of 10 times or greater cost of material. Another design consideration is the material durometer or hardness. For silicone, this is called out using the Short A scale. Mechanical properties such as hardness, flexibility, tear strength, and elongation are all tied to the durometer chosen. Will your product require radiopacity? Does it need to be visible under X-ray? How will it look? Will it be clear, pigmented, or striped? What will be the total number of lumens or pathways in the tube? Does the tubing need to be reinforced? What is the size and length of your device? So for those that are new to the extrusion process, some of the terms mentioned to this point may not be that meaningful. Here are a few photographs that can help illustrate the broad range of options regarding extrusion. Single lumen tubing is one of the most common tubes requested. It is a single pathway or lumen. Striped extrusions include a portion of tubing that is loaded with materials such as barium sulfate that are visible under X-ray. The stripe is created by introducing a second stream of material either into the crosshead or die. The stripe can be created such that it comes in contact with the interior or exterior of the tube, or it can be fully encapsulated such that it is buried in the wall. A stripe can also serve as a visual indicator to help detect twist in placement or use outside the body. Multi-lumen tubes are extrusions that contain multiple channels or passages through the length of the tube. Multi-lumen tubes are commonly used in medical applications where multiple segregated paths are needed for individual devices. The multiple channels can provide a separate path for air to inflate a balloon or segregate delivery or drainage. They can also provide a delivery path for small devices like cameras and wires when minimally invasive procedures are required. Multi-layered extrusions can provide another way to prevent contact with inner or outer surfaces and also add reinforcement. Reinforced extrusions are extrusions that utilize a design element or even a separate material to not only stabilize tubing, but ensure lumen integrity in more challenging applications. This might be helpful in an application where tubing is tightly coiled into equipment, where kinking could be detrimental to the function. Ribbing can be created in the outer wall of the tube, and/or wires or thermoplastic rods can be embedded into the walls to prevent this. Braiding, when incorporated into an extrusion, provides yet another method of reinforcement that can improve a tube's resistance to being crushed or kinked, as well as provide resistance to twist, allowing it to be steered in certain applications. Transitional tubing is a type of tubing where lumens may be added or removed during the process of extrusion. And finally, we have coated extrusion. Extrusions are generally coated after they have been extruded, and the coatings can also add additional performance properties such as lubricity. So having provided some insight into the types of extrusions, let's move into the process. On a very high level, the extrusion process can be summed up with three major steps: material preparation or milling, extrusion, and ancillary extrusion processes. The extrusion process is conducted using material that is often referred to as gum stock or HCR, which can be which is called high consistency rubber. A quick reference would be to think about a relatively soft clay such as Play-Doh. The preparation of this material for the extrusion process is done through a process called milling. Milling is the blending of a two-part gum stock on a two-roll mill to produce a homogeneous blended silicone. The materials mix via a shearing action introduced by dissimilar roll speeds. Since shear can introduce heat and heat can accelerate the curing process, the rollers are normally cooled to prevent this. Colorants and other additives are introduced during the milling step. The milled material is processed into strips or preform to be ready for delivery to the extruder. In the previous slide, we mentioned that additives are introduced during the milling step. So what items can be added during milling? Catalyst could be added, and catalyst is used to kick off the vulcanization or curing process. Some silicones do not incorporate this into the mix as received, and the end user must add and can customize the amount. Radiopacifiers can be added to allow the silicone device to be visible when x-rayed. Pigments or colors. In today's competitive landscape, having the ability to customize the appearance of your device can help it stand out and improve brand recognition. Antimicrobials are becoming more and more relevant to prevent infection. With the introduction of any additives, care must be taken in their selection, such that they do not potentially inhibit the curing or otherwise negatively affect the performance of the silicone. Once the material is prepared, it will run through the extruder and the extrusion tooling. Tooling will consist of a pin, which is also referred to as a mandrel, and a die. The pin and die are housed in a crosshead assembly. For medical applications, these are normally manufactured with stainless steel. The pin is used to create the interior or lumens of the tube, and the die creates the exterior shape and can be also a vehicle to introduce the stripe. The silicone that was formed into strips during the milling process is fed into the screw extruder. The screw moves the silicone through the pin and die that are housed in the crosshead. The extruder uses a screw to maintain pressure that forces the silicone through the pin and the die. The extruder is cooled to remove frictional heat generated by the screw from the silicone during the processing. Unlike thermoplastic extruders, which are typically horizontal, the silicone extruder is vertical, pulling the material upward or outward, stretching it to the proper size while it's cured. We're going to show you a couple videos here. In this video, you will see a strip of silicone being fed into the extruder. The rectangular-shaped white strip is silicone going into the throat of a screw extruder. Perfect. video, the red material comes out of the extruder in a raw, uncured state, and it loops vertically upward to be cured. In this case, it's passing through an IR oven, or infrared oven, and through a laser micrometer for monitoring and measurement, and finally it's being foiled in a tote. During the extrusion process, additional ancillary equipment can be employed to improve the process or add value. Inline measurement and closed-loop control can be integrated using equipment like a laser micrometer, which was seen in the previous video. Also, inline cutting can be conducted to trim the extrusion to length at the station rather than adding a downstream step. Back to you, Chris.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Charlie. We'll move on to our next polling question here for you. This is our second and final polling question, and this one asks, can pad printer ink for thermoplastics be used in silicones? Here your answer can be yes or no. Click on the radio button next to the answer that's appropriate for you, and we'll take a look at those results momentarily. Also a great time for you to ask any questions that you might have, and you can do that simply by clicking on the Q&A icon, typing your question in, and then clicking the submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have left. If we don't get to your question today, again, someone will get back to you after the program is over. So let's take a look now at our results. It looks like about 30% said yes and 70% said no. So Charlie, your thoughts on our second and final polling question.
Again, well done for our audience and our listeners. My thoughts, I won't say it can't be done, but a silicone-based ink is more likely to provide a robust bond and better adhesion. It's also generally the more accepted type of ink for printing on silicone. Once the extrusion has been produced, there are many secondary operations that can be conducted that add value and function to your device. Tipping and forming are conducted on partially cured or green extrusions. Tipping allows customization of the tip of your extruder with a chamfer, a bullet tip, or a spherical shape. These can provide a better vehicle for the device to enter an introducer or cavity. Forming can impart a shape not achievable at the actual time of extrusion. Shapes such as right angles, spirals, and J are often used for catheters and other drug delivery methods. After tipping or forming, the product is post-cured to set the final shape, normalize properties, and stabilize dimensions. Other secondary operations include mechanical bonding, overmolding, printing, adding holes, skiving, spring insertion, and coating. Bonding. Many medical applications require silicone to be bonded to other components, such as lures or valves. Silicone may also be bonded to other silicone. Bonding to silicone requires careful selection of adhesives and may require primers or special preparations of substrates. As some of you may know, silicone can be molded over substrates such as metal and some plastics. When dealing with extrusions, a molded feature such as a hub can be added to make it easier to access the lumens. The hub may also be the intersection of multiple individual access points, as seen on many catheters. This process may also require special primers or substrate preparation methods. Printing can be added to provide identifying information such as size, depth marks, or even a logo. The printing of silicone can be difficult and requires expertise in not only the selection of ink, but also in the application. In special cases, plasma or corona treatment might be required to prepare the surface such that the appropriate bond can be created. Holes can serve a variety of purposes, including drug delivery, drainage, and flow control. They can be round or oval in shape, and they can be created via punching or drilling. There are several quality concerns when creating holes, such as cleanliness of cut or hanging chads. An experienced manufacturing partner can help navigate these potential problems. Skiving is a different style of hole that's an alternative to the traditional punch hole and essentially allows the creation of an oval hole using a circular punch. Spring insertion and encapsulation provides for a method of reinforcing the device. By encapsulating the spring, the metal is not exposed to the fluids passing through the extrusion. And coatings, depending on the product need, There are options that add lubricity to lower the coefficient of friction, and tubing can also receive hydrophilic coatings. Silicone rubber extrusions and secondary processes can be combined into more and more medical and pharmaceutical applications. Typical medical applications include wound drains, shunt devices, drug delivery devices, and catheters. With the background design and manufacturing provided, we will move to some case studies that incorporate extrusions and secondary processes. Our first case study is a fecal management catheter. A medical device manufacturer approached Flexan with a multi-component medical device for fecal management and continence. The complex device required multiple operations and had specific design criteria that differentiated the product from the competition. Operations included extrusion, molding, diving, slitting, bonding, and pad printing. The manufacturer was looking for a partner that could fabricate a turnkey solution for the entire device. There were three key challenges manufacturing the device: the complex, thin-walled, multi-lumen extrusion, the mechanical bonds for the main connector, 2 ports and balloon, and the placement of the sampling porthole. All the bonded components had to be watertight and not separate, and the punched hole for the sample port could not be deformed so that a slip-tip syringe could be introduced without any leakage. A closed system was imperative to not negatively compromise the patient. The solution. The extrusion was an 18 thousandths wall round tube with an irrigation lumen on one side and 2 lumens for medication on the other. A multi-lumen tube was created with the complex, thin-wall geometry needed for each of the required features. A precision, custom-formed punch was used to cut holes and not leave residual chads or particulate matter inside the device. The thermoplastic connector, balloon, irrigation, medication, and sampling ports were attached, applying a 2-part platinum-cured, heat-activated adhesive, and the use of custom fixtures to aid in the joining process. Finally, the tube and sampling ports, both irrigation and medication, are pad printed using a silicone-based ink. Now I'd like to expand on the photos that illustrate specific areas of the solution. The photograph at the top presents a 4-lumen thin-walled extrusion. Note the lumen at the 2 o'clock location and the 2 lumens at the 7 o'clock position. The photograph to the right represents a tube that is bonded to a plastic collar and then press fit to a connector. At the bottom is a photo of a bonded, thin-walled balloon. And finally, on the left is a photo of 2 different pad-printed ports. So our second case study today is the floating stripe. A major device manufacturer came to Flexan with a particular extrusion challenge. The customer required that the catheter silicone extruded tube contain an encapsulated barium stripe that did not contact either the inner or outer walls of the tubing. The barium stripe was required to allow medical personnel to see the location of the device under X-ray. The technical challenges of having the stripe float in the wall of the tube required proper extrusion pressure, barium-loaded silicone evenly exiting the crosshead and extrusion die, and monitoring of the stripe location. The application required the barium radiopaque marker in the extrusion be embedded rather than exposed to the ID or OD. The device would be used as an implant, and by assuring the stripe does not contact the body or fluids passing through it, the stripe would not have to be included in any biocompatibility testing. This can save the device owner money by not having to submit for testing, as well as time by not having to wait for results. Appropriate tool design, extruders correctly chosen and sized to provide proper pressure, as well as a laser micrometer monitoring the OD, all contributed to the successful production of the customer's design. I'd like to thank you all for attending today's webinar, and that concludes our presentation. My colleague, Dennis Rector, will join for the question and answer segment of the webinar. And Chris, I hand it back to you.
All right, thank you, Charlie. We're now going to move on to the question and answer portion of our event. As a reminder, if you'd like to participate in our Q&A session, simply type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And please note that we'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have left. If we're unable to get to your individual question today, someone will get back to you after the program is over. So let's get started with some questions for you, gentlemen. Looks like we've got several coming in. Our first one, does Flexan offer samples on multi-lumen silicon tubing?
So currently, Flexan is a contract manufacturer, so we don't own any of our own tooling. So we do sample runs. However, we do it on a quick turn basis that's generally 2 to 3 weeks on a simple extrusion. More complex extrusion, it would be 4 to 5 weeks.
All right, thank you, Dennis. We'll move on to another question here for you. Our next question, hold on one second here. How do you predict the working pressure burst pressure of a tube design given the large deformations silicone experiences?
So there again, as a contract manufacturer, we typically don't do any predictions on the performance of the extrusion. We can offer solutions such as wall thickness, durometers within our range, and possible reinforcements to partner with our potential customers. However, we don't typically do any of the engineering side of it when it comes to burst pressures.
All right, thank you, Dennis. We'll move on to another question here. Our next question asks, when overmolding silicone into a silicon tube, how much of an undercut is acceptable to still be able to remove the tool?
Generally, as a rule of thumb for silicone, you can go 300 to 400% without permanent distortion of the silicone part. So when you're doing a insert molded silicone extrusion, you can use that as a general rule of thumb. Obviously, it's going to vary by the size of your product, but that's a good recommendation.
It'll also vary. To add to what Dennis explained, he gave a nice range. If you choose a lower or higher durometer, you can also change that a little bit up and down, but generally in the 300 to 400% is relatively safe.
All right, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Charlie. We'll move on to another question here. Our next one asks, what about the VOC of extruded parts?
So as far as VOC, if you were to choose a peroxide cured silicone, there is some amount of volatiles that normally gets flashed off when you post-cure. Generally, with medical grade silicones, we're working with platinum cures, and volatiles are very low or non-existent.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Our next question asks, when extruding striped tubing, does this affect the burst pressure rating?
There again, we would leave that up to our customer's final design verification testing. However, generally, barium stripes don't affect the integrity of the silicone tube. It becomes cross-linked to the clear material and part of the extrusion, just like if it was all clear.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And as a reminder to our audience, if you'd like to ask a question, just go ahead and type your question in, click the submit button. We'll go ahead and answer as many here as we can in the time we have left. Our next question for you, what sort of inline measurements are taken? OD, ID, wall thickness, durometer, etc.?
So the inline measurement is 100% OD, outside diameter. In conjunction with the laser mic that monitors the OD 100%, we also do startup dimensions by the extrusion operator as well as our QC dimensional group, and we monitor the process every 30 minutes for all CTQ dimensions.
And with what Dennis mentioned, generally the operator will take a section. You can measure OD, ID, wall, any CTQs as he pointed out, meaning critical to quality.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to another question here for you. Our next question asks, I've heard of platinum cured silicone. Is this about adding a platinum-based additive during milling?
No. So unlike peroxide cure, where there's organic peroxide that's added to the silicone while you're milling, with platinum cured silicone, it's put in by the silicone manufacturers. It's a very trace amount of platinum, which just is the cure mechanism when heat is added.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Were you finished with your answer, Dennis?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. It sounded like you might have gotten cut off a little bit there. All right, our next question for you. Do the majority of tubing fabricators expect FDA site certification or clean room capabilities from their HCR supplier?
No, not to my knowledge. So Flexan monitors all of their vendors. We do on-site audits as well, and we've done that with a lot of our silicone vendors. What our silicone vendors do as mitigation for fiber and particulate and contaminants is they use what's called a screen mesh, which is usually a 200 by 200 or 300 by 300, so it filters out the A and B components of the elastomers prior to final packaging. And likewise, in our process, we use a screen mesh filter pack within our extruder to also further filter out fiber and particulate.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And we'll move on to another question here. What are the typical tolerances that can be achieved in silicone extrusions?
So generally, the tolerance would depend, obviously, on the size of the extrusion. Generally, as a good rule of thumb, if you could do plus or minus 1% of whatever size you're looking at, that's typically the tolerances that we are meeting and validating to.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Another question has come in that asks, how hard a shore grade can you extrude a tube of?
The silicone goes up to 80 on the short A scale.
You can add a little bit of hardness with, like a barium sulfate would bring it up a few points, but you're not going to get a whole lot higher than that as received from our manufacturers.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Our next question asks, are there any fillers or additives that you can add to silicone to change its mechanical properties?
Well, barium sulfate changes the mechanical properties a little bit, however, is generally used to be radio-opaque. If a customer approaches us with other fillers or additives that they'd like to experiment with, we may be able to work with them and, in conjunction with our manufacturers, come up with whether it's an appropriate blend that may not hurt the curing mechanism or the properties.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Our next question asks, what durometer is good for a 27 psi air pressure?
There again, with that question, we would partner with our customers during the sampling process, and in conjunction with their application testing, we could come up with a solution. There's a lot of factors, you know, when you're dealing with silicone tubing and pressure. Wall thickness becomes just as much of a significant factor as the durometer of the silicone. So design comes into play. So it's not really a straight answer to that question.
I agree.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. And we'll move on to yet another question here for you. This one asks, does the reinforced tubing, and then it references the image with the two wires, increase kink resistance in all bend directions?
Well, if it was the image with just the two wires, it might improve it it would improve it more in certain directions than others. If you wanted it in all directions, you'd probably be better off going with a braiding or some sort of co-extrusion.
All right, thank you, Charlie. And moving on to another question here. Our next one says, how small can you make multi-lumen channels in silicone tubing?
Generally, you can go down to 8 to 10 thousandths of an inch. The advantage to silicone extrusion is you can make the tooling larger, and you can actually stretch the silicone tube down prior to the IR curing oven to make it very small.
And we would work with the customer on their application. We may be able to vary durometer. There may be some other factors where we could push the limits with them.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Another one has come in asking, does a multi-lumen tube require consistent wall thickness throughout?
You'll generally achieve a consistent wall thickness. However, we will extrude to the specification that our customer has arrived at. So if the customer is calling for plus or minus 2 thousandths, our target would be plus or minus 2 thousandths, and we would monitor to that.
And in addition to what Charlie said, generally silicone extrusion likes symmetry. So if you're trying to do a thick wall on one side and a thin wall on the other side of the extrusion, your extrusion will tend to want to distort or deform. It likes to be, symmetric as far as the profile. But there are some exceptions to the rule, depending on the applications.
All right, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Charlie. Another question asks, what level clean room do you use?
We currently have a certified Class 7 clean room.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And another question has come in asking, would corona treating the silicone affect the mechanical properties or biocompatibility of the tubing?
Not usually.
Not that I'm aware of either. Generally, corona treatment of silicone is used to get better bonding for coatings.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Our next one asks, is the silicone milled in the clean room or in another location?
Yes, it is milled in their certified Class 7 clean room.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And we're moving on to another question here for you. Does the addition of platinum or other metals to the silicone affect the compatibility of the silicone for MRI applications?
As I stated earlier, it's a trace amount of platinum that manufacturers put into the silicone. I'm not aware of any issues with silicone applications for MRI.
Yeah, not when it's a platinum cured. That has to do with the curing chemistry. Now, if additional metals were added, that would need to be investigated by the customer. So, for example, a silver oxide, that would need to be investigated by the customer as to how it affects that.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Our next question for you here, is the majority of this extruded tubing post-cured or non-post-cured? And if it is post-cured, what is the common method for post-curing?
So we do a lot of secondary post-curing with a lot of the tubes that we extrude. Generally, it's for two reasons, either to raise the durometer a couple more points from what you're getting from the raw tubing. The second reason is that we do forming, which is the process by which we extrude the silicone a little greener, and then we form whatever shape the customers desire. That's done in an oven. And the third reason, if it's a peroxide cure silicone, as Charlie stated earlier, you want to drive off peroxide residuals, so that is also post-cured in an oven. Type of ovens that we use are convection ovens for all of our extrusions.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Our next one here asks, how would you recommend to clean silicone tubing surfaces before coating application, especially hydrophilic coating?
Isopropyl alcohol is what we would recommend. So all of our molded as well as extruded components are 100% clean with isopropyl alcohol when they leave our facility. And the issue is that when you open up the package in another facility, even if it's a clean room environment, there still is some level of fiber and particulate. So right before the coating application, you clean it with alcohol, let it air dry enough for your coating, and should solve your problem.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Our next question asks, what's the most commonly requested hardness for tubing?
I would say 50 or 60 Shore A is the most common durometers that we extrude.
All right, thank you, Dennis. And we'll move on to another question here for you. Our next one asks, does Flexan strictly create the silicone parts or final devices, or does Flexan offer packaging and sterilization services as well?
So we do the components molded out of silicone, extruded out of silicone. We do secondary operations, as Charlie mentioned earlier, with cutting, punching, skiving. We do medical device assembly, and we also do sterile intent packaging.
However, we don't sterilize. We can arrange with you to have it sterilized. It does not happen here on site.
Usually we drop ship to a sterilizer.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. And we'll move on to yet another question here for you. This one asks, how is platinum requested versus peroxide? Is one material more popular with customers than another?
So platinum is basically the standard nowadays. Peroxide is an older curing system. So generally, unless someone asks us for peroxide, we're going to be quoting platinum.
Correct. Yeah, the only applications that we typically see in peroxide is when a customer has a material that's already been biocompatibility testing, that's in their list of approved materials. Generally, all new silicones are all platinum.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Another question asks, can Flexan provide me with a good food-grade silicone tube that is manufactured in the U.S.?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to another question. This one asks, do you often receive requests for optically clear tubing?
I'm not aware of any requests for optically clear tubing. However, we do optically clear molded parts. So I don't see an issue why that couldn't be done if your application requires that grade of material.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Another one came in that asks, what challenges did you face in the case study number 1, I guess, with the multi-lumen tube? This had a couple of diameters on the D-wall thickness, is what it looks like it says.
The fecal catheter.
Yes. The challenges with that particular application were just keeping the lumens open due to the thin wall on that extrusion when it was such a large diameter. So we had to incorporate some methods using our pneumatic shop air that would allow us to keep the profiles open while we were extruding. It's a little non-conventional application.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Our next question asks, would gamma radiation affect the silicone materials?
That's a great question. So that is yet another reason why you would want to post-cure a extruded silicone tube. So gamma will affect any silicone extrusion or molded part because it continues to cross-link the material. So you can have dimensional changes if you don't post-cure it in a convection oven to stabilize the part.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Another question asks, what was the name of the treatment you mentioned to improve bonding?
There's a couple kind of treatments you can use, and the ones I mentioned are corona treatment and plasma treatment.
Correct, which generally are very similar.
Yeah, very similar. They affect the surface energy of the tubing, allowing a bond to take place. They're temporary treatments. They don't last a long time, so if you conduct a corona or plasma treatment, you need to bond very shortly after doing it.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to another question here for you. What do you believe is the minimum wall thickness between multi-lumen channels in silicone tubing that will not have the propensity to break if you were to kink the tubing?
So again, that would be an application-specific question. Silicone generally doesn't have a propensity to tear just by the nature of the raw material. I've seen walls as thin as 20 thousandths on 15 thousandths on silicone extrusions with no problem.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Another question asks, do you have a list of silicone resins that you use and their material properties?
Well, this is Charlie. The manufacturers that we listed, we have access to their entire line cards. There are some, if you're interested in ones that are in stock, we can talk with you about those. I would recommend you contact one of our reps, and we can get you a list, a more thorough list.
All right, gentlemen. That looks like all the questions that we have for right now, and we'll give just a moment here for anyone who'd like to ask a question or two to go ahead and submit them, and then we'll take a look at them. Just give us just one moment. Again, click on the Q&A icon next to the, the Q&A icon, type your question in, and then click the submit button. And once again, if we do not get to your question today, then someone will get back to you after the program is over. So let's take a look here and see if we've got anything new coming in. I think we have one, but let me take a look. And real quickly, Dennis and Charlie, do you have any quick final thoughts while we're waiting for a question or two to come in?
I would add, if there's something that wasn't quite clear, or if there's an application that you're looking to vet, contact one of our reps. They can get hold of myself or Dennis, and we can work with you through what that application might be. We can offer suggestions, and we can help you find a solution.
All right, thank you, Charlie. We do have another question here. This one asks, what would you prefer, HTV extruded tubes with platinum cure versus LSR extruded tubing, and why?
Actually, LSR cannot be extruded, so it's not a material that anyone extrudes. The reason why HCR is chosen as a type of silicone for extrusion is because when the material exits the die, as Charlie showed you guys in the video earlier, that material is still in its raw state. So if somebody were to take their finger and touch the tubing, they would break it because it doesn't get cured until it goes through the infrared heat stack. So LSR is got way too low of a viscosity to be able to hold its shape to go vertically or horizontally before it's hit with the heat to cure the tubing. I did see another question earlier, and I'm going to address it as long as I'm on the subject, about why is extrusion vertical and not horizontal. So extrusion can be done horizontally. The reason why it's vertical and not horizontal in 99% of the applications is because, again, the material is in its raw state when it comes out of the pin and die. And if you extrude it horizontally onto a conveyor, you're going to get what's called track marks on the tubing. So as long as it's acceptable to have some attribute marks on the OD of the tubing, then it can be done horizontally. But a lot of applications don't accept that attribute feature.
All right, thank you, Dennis. We'll move on to another question that's come in. How are the surface properties changing upon balloon expansion?
So is this in regards to a tubing used for a balloon on a catheter? If that's the case, I mean, I don't see the surface finish changing as the balloon expands. I've used ribbed extrusions for catheter balloons before. When the balloon expands, it's the same smooth surface finish, just like when it's extruded.
And they generally recover very well. You can expand them and deflate them over and over again. We don't have any measured studies that would show a difference there.
Correct.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Another question has come in asking, does silicone need to be heat treated for EO sterilization?
It does not require post-cure for ETO sterilization.
All right, and we'll move on to another one here. What sterilization disinfection methods are best compatible for doing so? We mentioned gamma, but what about, it says EO. Maybe they're just shortening it.
Yeah, it's ethylene oxide. Ethylene oxide is compatible with silicone. Most customers evaluate the residuals, but generally silicone is very good with EO residuals. The difference is that EO it doesn't change the silicone dimensionally like gamma does.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Another question has come in. Do you have the capability for doing combination products?
Combination products, that being silicone and thermoplastic combined, because that was one of the case studies that Charlie did go through. We do catheters that incorporate both silicone and thermoplastic components.
All right, well, thank you, Dennis.
Contacting one of our reps.
Thank you, Charlie. It didn't clarify that on the question. That does, however, look like all the time that we do have for questions for today. I'd like to thank you, Charlie Zambilis and Dennis Rector. QMed appreciates your time and your expertise on today's topic. And for our audience, if we did not get to your question today, someone will get back to you after the program is over. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Flexan, as well as everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and your participation. And within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been available to listen to today's live event. This webinar is copyright 2021 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyright by QMed and Flexan, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guests, Charlie Zambilis and Dennis Rector, I'm Chris Keach. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.